Genesis chapter 1 says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, over the surface of the deep. The earth was formless and empty, and the creative Holy Spirit passed by and organized what was going to happen. And then the Creator power of God made all things. When the Holy Spirit starts to act in Jerusalem through those disciples, the church starts to grow, starts to develop. The miracles that the disciples didn't make, they were now making. Do you remember those disciples that couldn't keep watch with Jesus for 1 hour in prayer? And because of the hope of the arrival of the Holy Spirit, they were now praying for 10 unstoppable days in order to arrive another counselor. And that's what hope makes with us. It makes us mature. If the church is not waiting for Jesus, is not talking about Jesus returning, so this church doesn't get mature. This church might have good deeds, but it doesn't get mature. And when the first problem takes place, the believers turn away from God because there is no hope. Jesus says on John chapter 14, verse 17, the Spirit of truth, the world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him. What is this world that Jesus is talking about? What is this world? This was the world that they lived in. Jesus was talking about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, about the other Jews, about the Romans. He was talking about the whole society, except the group that walked with him. But Jesus was talking about everyone. And how could he say that this world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him? We can't see him neither. Those disciples couldn't neither. But Jesus is not talking about seeing with physical eyes. He's talking about believing that he exists. And nowadays, there is a church that believes, that doesn't believe that the Holy Spirit is a person. There is a church that thinks that the Holy Spirit is a strength and not a person, is something that enables, is a is an upgrade for the believer. But he's a person. And the promise of the arrival of the Holy Spirit, it is accomplished in Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples and they started to speak new languages. But in chapter 14, Jesus had blowed the Holy Spirit upon them. And the difference is what's spoken in verse 17. He lives with you and he will be in you. Because it's possible we congregate with the Holy Spirit here and the Holy Spirit not to be living in us. It's possible. It's possible that you come every Sunday to the church with the Holy Spirit here with you in the bus, in the car. He's ubiquitous. But it's possible there to be a place where the Holy Spirit does not live, which is in you. Have you thought about this? About the Holy Spirit living everywhere except in you? Jesus is talking to these disciples, and when he says the word give, he will give you another counselor in verse 16. This word is translated as giving himself to someone who he belonged to, or coming back, returning. That's why I tell you, the Jews had him, but they couldn't access him. They didn't live with him. John translate this word of Jesus with uh, by saying that God was going to send the Holy Spirit that was, but wasn't anymore then. The Holy Spirit that's going to come back. So he creates a second expectation of returning that makes the disciples to pray for 10 days for his returning. And now we wait for the Messiah, Jesus Christ, to return because we didn't have to wait for the Holy Spirit. When we accept that Jesus, he was already here. He is already here. What we need to do is to stop wasting our times and start to live with the Holy Spirit. Apostle Paul says in Galatians 5:16, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. It says, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And this is the formula. How can you know if the Holy Spirit lives in you? You know, if you gratify the desires of the flesh. So, if you gratify the desires of the flesh, the desires of your sinful nature, so the Holy Spirit doesn't live in you. If you have a hard time to serve Him, a hard time to be a believer, if you can't be alone, that you start to sin. So the Holy Spirit does not live in you. He lives with you, but not in you. He needs to live in us. He needs to live in us. This should be a reason of despair. How is the church supposed to wait for Jesus' return? How will the church be able to wait for Jesus' return if the Holy Spirit doesn't live in us?